Hi there guys, Mike from MCQ Bushcraft here, and welcome to another episode on the build series. If you watched the last episode, you would have had a bit of an idea of what's coming up in this episode, or the next 2 or 3. The guys at Ruffstuff in the United States really kindly sent me some frame stiffeners for the front and the centre portion of the frame on the Jeep Cherokee. Before I go into this video, just wanted to say a big thanks to the guys at Ruffstuff. Really appreciate that. This is something I've wanted to do for a long time. Hopefully get that all installed, and it's a big job but massively appreciated. And that really brings me on to why I would fit such a thing. There are probably a lot of people out there watching this thinking, why on earth would you do that? Well, a lot of companies make this kit. I think they're 3/16, about 5mm in terms of thickness, so they really stiffen up the actual frame of the vehicle. And unlike other vehicles, the Cherokee is a Uni Frame, and what that means is if you look at like an older truck, you can lift the body off the frame. With the Cherokee, it's not like that. You have a frame, but it's permanently welded to the actual body of the vehicle. There are pros and cons to this. Mainly cons in a heavy off-roading perspective, but there are some pros. The vehicle weight means it's much lighter, about 1.6 tons curb weight, so actually quite light for the type of vehicle it is. But if you're going to off-road it, turning them into rock crawlers, going over giant boulders and scaling vertical faces, which obviously I'm doing none of, then you're going to want to stiffen up the Uni Frame. But one reason I'm doing it really is the longevity of the vehicle. Obviously I've restored this thing, and I've always wanted to stiffen up the body of the vehicle, take away that flex, give it more longevity, and it makes it actually a more comfortable ride. When you're going over lots of corrugation, when you've got a stiff body on the vehicle, the suspension does a lot of the work and the body remains very rigid, instead of it transferring into the body and causing it to flex and gyrate quite a lot. And you don't really want that over long periods of time. Plus, I will be off-roading it after the trip, and stiffening it up really helps. It means that when rocks bash the actual frame, they don't dent it, they just scrape off of these plates here. And I've got the front and I've got the centre portion ready to go in. You saw how I installed it on the end of the last video, where I've run it back to the sill as well. Obviously the sills are rotten in my Cherokee, and it almost failed its MOT on the rotten sills last year, as I've said. And we'll be putting in box section and obviously tying that back to the stiffener. So our first job is to unbolt everything underneath the vehicle around the frame that might get in the way of us preparing that area to weld this in. So some of the things we've got to remove on this side, which in my case is the driver's side. In the States it would be the passenger side. I have a side exit exhaust that needs to come out, because obviously it's all around the frame here. We're going to need to drop this cross member that holds the transfer case. That's going to need to just be dropped. I'm not going to take that off, I'll just drop it down and put a jack stand, an axle stand, sorry, underneath it to stop it coming free. And we're going to need to remove this rough country support that's for the control arm drop brackets. And that's basically it. And then after that, we have the job really of removing all the undercoat underneath the vehicle. And that is not as hard as it seems. It's a messy job, but a blowtorch and a scraper and a couple of hours down the line and it should be done. Ooh. I've got 2 spot welds just there holding this bracket on. I did that just to secure it some time ago. I didn't do it on the other side, so I'm going to have to get the angle grinder in and just cut those, and then this bracket will come free. So we're going to start clearing away the undercoat on the majority of this frame here, on this outside portion, so underneath and on the side. But it's a fairly long job this. You're going to need a scraper, a fairly rigid one, and a torch to heat up the undercoat. If you've got access to a shot blaster, then it'll be way quicker and probably still be as messy. What we'll do now is zinc prime the whole frame, but this will just give us some rust protection on those areas we've cleaned down. So that should help that frame survive a little bit longer, just putting that primer on. But you may ask why we've put primer on. We're going to weld straight to it. Doesn't quite make sense unless we use something like this, a weld through primer, which you can weld directly through. And this is a good quality one. U-POL make good stuff. But we're not going to use that all on that frame because we don't really need to. We just need to use this just on the areas where we actually are going to grind back to bare metal and weld to. So that's why I used a slightly cheaper primer that helps prevent rust on the majority of the frame we clean down. If we look at this stiffener here, we are going to use the same method on this. This is the inside of the stiffener that goes against the frame, and this is where we'll be welding. So what we'll do on the inside of this is we'll spray this with weld through primer as well. So really we're giving it a brilliant chance at living for many years on from here, and no rush or water should get in between those two surfaces at all, given all the measures we took on the other side. And we'll do the same this side. One thing we do need to do is remove this extra piece on the end of the stiffening kit. I run the standard short arm lift on my vehicle. You can get a long arm lift where the arms stretch all the way to the centre of the vehicle, giving you ridiculous articulation. But I don't have that kind of setup, so this piece can go. And they leave this there in case you do have a long arm kit on your Jeep. So that's all in there pretty nicely. It'd be helpful if we had more jacks than this, because you can see it's cut so it can be folded into the frame, and then you weld this down to make it solid against the frame. So what we're going to do is take some G-clamps, push it up flush against the frame where we've got it jacked up, then move the jack and do the whole thing, marking out where it needs to actually be ground away to weld. One tip I will give you for doing the other side, which is where the fuel lines are, is not just to chuck a G-clamp on and start doing it up real tight, because you could crush the fuel lines. So you need to make space in between them to put the G-clamp in. There is enough of a lip at the bottom so you can get the G-clamp in and tighten things up without having to do anything to the fuel lines. But you just want to be careful what's behind what you're working in. My pen can't get into these areas here, so you can obviously just use the stiffener as a stencil. And then just clean it down afterwards with a rag before the paint dries. That's it. We're all marked up. Just lower that down gently. That primer needs to set now. I'm going to let it dry out completely overnight. It's supposed to be good stuff. Went on well, looks good. Let's see how it welds tomorrow. U-POL is supposed to be a very, very good brand. A lot of their products are good. Their etch primer is very good. So let's hope this is too. So I'll see you guys in the morning. Well, it's the morning. The weld through primer on the frame is dry and it's dry on the stiffener too. But I did some editing last night and I looked at the footage of where I was grinding away back to bare metal to do the welding. And obviously when we do welding, that area is going to get really hot, and it occurred to me that I didn't grind away nearly enough of the primer back to bare metal, and what will happen when we weld is it'll all just burn away and flake anyway. So I ground away a much bigger area this morning around where I'll be doing those welds, and primed the whole frame with weld through primer. From the beginning I probably could have just sprayed the whole frame with weld through primer, but hopefully that zinc primer will be doing something where it remains. But this is ready to tack weld in place now. We're going to do this bit by bit. Going to start here, get this tack welded and move down the frame. So we've got this front portion in place now, and if we look at the installation, you'll actually see a slight gap between the stiffener and the frame, and this is where the G-clamps come in. We need to pull this into the frame. It's no good just tack welding this in, or else we have a slight gap. So there we go, the shadow is pretty much gone now, and this is pulled in nice and tight, so we can actually tack weld that in. Well, the weld through primer welds okay. Seems to be welding all right. Smells a bit weird though. So that's all tacked in and looking good, and we're ready to permanently weld that to the frame. But my frame, as I said in previous videos, is filled with cavity wax, and what will happen is when we start welding permanently, it's going to create a lot of heat, and the wax on the other side is going to liquefy and start running out of all the holes in the frame. So you want to have a tarp on the ground or something at least to catch that, but at the same time you don't want it to ignite either. So I've got two tools here. One's a hose, and I feed that up inside the frame. If I hear any kind of bubbling that sounds a bit strange and a lot of smoke, and you just blow into the frame and it blows it out very easily. It doesn't really take much to blow the stuff out. But if things go really bad, I've got a CO2 fire extinguisher here, and this is an old one, and it's useful to have around, because you can just blast a shot of CO2 up into the frame and it puts anything out. But even doing the other side, I didn't have any issues at all. Just using the pipe was enough. But let's get it permanently welded to the frame. There's a load of smoke absolutely flying at the frame. I think it's on fire. Maybe I should just lie here and go up with it. That's the hard part done. All the welding is finished. And just to recap on where I've welded, I've done all the plug welds along the sides. I've done everything underneath as well. There's plug welds that you fill underneath. If there's drain holes for the actual frame, I haven't filled those in. I've just done around them, so the actual stiffener is sealed around the drain hole and the drain hole can still function as normal. I've also stitch welded all the way along the back of the frame where it actually ends and the normal frame begins, just to tie it off. I've also reinforced it around the front where the control arm bracket hangs down, and heavily reinforced it around the back where the leaf spring hanger is. But the main thing I'm going to do now is get the wire wheel on the drill, clean everything up thoroughly. All those welds want to be cleaned down so they're nice and shiny. Then we're going to use the fat disc on the grinder, take it all back flush with the stiffener, and then use seam sealer and P38 to seal the whole thing off so water cannot get in between those two surfaces. And then after that, we'll drill all the factory drain plugs out and use the seam sealer around there as well, so the water can just go straight out the frame and not go between the two surfaces. So we're all finished with the seam sealer, and it's a fairly straightforward job. The main place you want to apply it is at the top lip where the stiffener ends and the floor pan starts, and that way that will stop water and grit getting up behind that panel, usually from the back of the tyre and then going between the two surfaces. That's the most important place really. If you're going to go wading through deep water, then there's probably not a lot you can do, and water will always find a way, but you can do the best job you can, and that's all you can do. I've put it in every nook and cranny I can, rubbed it in the welds to make sure it's filled any pinholes. I've also gone around the other side of the panel and put it in between those surfaces as well. But I've also used P38, which is like a cement, and I've used that to fill all the gaps in all the welds and reinforce various areas and just smooth them down. So when they're finished, it will look almost like the original, and you won't be able to tell the difference unless you've got a keen eye. Whilst we're waiting for all that to dry, I've had this can of Dinitrol 3125 cavity wax in some really hot water, just warming it up because the weather's cold today. And we're going to put this pipe with a diffuser on the end inside the frame and line the inside of it with wax and replace all of the wax we burnt away when we were welding. And it's really important you do that, or else you're leaving exposed metal inside. So now the P38 and seam sealer are dry, I've sanded it down with a fat disc and also used some sandpaper just to give it a good finish. And everything's flush and it looks really good. Also, I've taken a drill and marked up all the drain holes using the other side as a reference, and drilled it with a pilot hole, then used a bigger 12mm drill just to give you a decent hole for water and dirt to drain out of. Having done this job though, my advice would be to do that before you put the stiffener and actually permanently fix it to the frame. It makes it easier, and although the stiffener does have some holes already cut in it for factory drain holes, my advice would be to put them all in. Simply because what will happen is you have the existing frame with a hole, and then you put a big thick plate beneath it and you create a depression, and obviously water can go in there and just get between the two surfaces. You do not want that. So by drilling that hole, it means the water can come straight out, and if you put a bit of seam seal around it, or P38, some kind of sealant basically to make that hole just one straight cylinder instead of it being like a ridge with a lip, then you should have the best possible chance of the water just coming straight out and not getting between the stiffener and the frame. What I did as well was put the cavity wax hose just above where I drilled the hole, like inside, and went psh, giving it a good spray, and it just diffuses all the wax into all the nooks and crannies where you've drilled the hole, and hopefully seals it up so the water can just come straight out and not get trapped between the two surfaces. I've also given it a good coating of zinc primer, but that's really where the finish ends in this video, because in the next episode I've got to cut these sills out and put in 2x6 box section, and then we're going to tie that back to the frame with legs like I've shown you in this clip on the other side, and that'll make it incredibly strong and also reinforce all these pillars on the actual vehicle and stiffen it up quite a bit. And it does replace my rotten sill, which is the main reason I'm doing it, because the sill is literally rotten and falling apart, and it fails its MOT because of it. I had to patch it up, but it's come to a point really where it needs doing, and now I've got the time and the resources, I should probably do it. So after we've done all that, we'll give it a heavy coating of undercoat, much like we've done the other side, and in the previous videos on the vehicle you've seen the undercoat I use. It's very reliable and heavy duty, and it doesn't chip like paint, and that's why I use it really, and I've had very good results with it. So I appreciate you watching. If you've enjoyed this video and you want to see other videos like it, check out the playlist. There should be a few more build videos coming up soon, and then we'll get into the inside and get it kitted out for when we do our trip, because I've only got 6 weeks to go before we leave. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon. Take care.